Okay, so we're going to be talking about what is GitHub Copilot, what are the benefits, why should you use it, how does it make development faster, more productive, what are the main features, how to prompt and how to interact with GitHub Copilot, where it makes sense and where it doesn't. And then we'll go into use cases, the primary use cases for it, and then most importantly, the demos. So I have a very short slide deck that most of this presentation is going to be live interactive demos. And as I'm doing the demos, if you have questions or you want to see if a particular feature can work or not, please put that in the chat and do my best to incorporate questions from the chat while doing the demos. So I do have some canned, ready to roll demos, but certainly open to exploring any kind of use case that you may come up with. So GitHub Copilot. What is GitHub Copilot? It is AI pair programmer. So it's a software application. It runs as an agent, and I'm sure you've run across in the past few years the AI revolution and have worked with ChatGPT or similar Claude or similar products. So Copilot, GitHub Copilot is a lot like ChatGPT or any other chat program, but it is specifically geared to developing code. So it is highly trained on generating code and answers code-related questions versus other language models which have general knowledge in a wide variety of domains that may not specialize in code. Many of them can produce code, but they're not specialized, and GitHub is really an AI pair programmer. So where does this come from? The specialized knowledge comes from GitHub being the central repository for millions and millions of open source projects, providing very rich training data that in the permissive licenses in open source, when people contribute to code on GitHub, in the public GitHub. Now there is GitHub Enterprise, which is your private code. GitHub is not trained on private enterprise data and in private repositories. It's just trained on publicly available source code with public open licenses. But that said, there are millions and millions and billions of lines of code that was trained on, thus many, many, many programming examples that have been done in all kinds of languages. Tens, even hundreds of programming languages are covered in the AI Codex. So that's that specialized database of knowledge. As I mentioned, it works with all kinds of languages, the leading languages, legacy languages, and all kinds of IDEs. So it's not tied to a particular integrated development environment, IDE. It can work with Visual Studio in the Microsoft world. It can work with the JetBrains, PyCharm. It can work with Java development tools as well. So it's not tied to any particular IDE. And it can be used in browser as well. So the main purpose for GitHub Copilot is boosting developer productivity. So this is whether it's creating new code, exploring libraries, or looking, if you need to generate a PDF and you're working in Python, you can ask GitHub, can you please recommend some libraries for me? And then it'll pull in those libraries. Or you're in Java and you need to export to a particular file format. You're in C# and you want to write to XLSX Excel files, exploring these kind of libraries. Tests, software by nature needs to be tested, and generating unit tests is a big chunk of work and a continuous chunk of work as application code changes and evolves. The tests need to change and evolve. GitHub Copilot really shines in moving new tests, moving existing tests along with the code base and generating new tests. And lastly, documentation. Developers are notorious. I'm a developer myself. Developers are notorious for not providing documentation, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Often, project timelines are very compressed to begin with, and documentation done too early is likely to change and just be wasteful work, and documentation done too late, which is normally the case, there's never enough time. So GitHub Copilot really changes the game as far as generating documentation. Just between writing tests and documentation, right there, the GitHub licenses are worth it on their own, but adding in the code generation and debugging and. There's just all kinds of reasons to have an AI pair programmer today. We got to admit some people here. Okay, next. So it is a pair programmer. It's not GitHub Autopilot. So as much as some executives may want, programming to just be an automagical thing, it is a helper that needs human oversight. So if you're a new developer, it can help you write code, but it is best used as a tool for experienced developers who know how to validate the output, because there can be errors, there can be nonsensical things that it generates. It is a statistical model, so it's not a pure reasoning model. Improvements are being made all the time, and the code quality is quite good, but it's imperative that there is human oversight on what's happening, and to not forget about that. So what are the primary benefits? Far and above, as I mentioned with the tests and the documentation, is speed. Something that may have taken 2 to 3 hours can cut down to 45 minutes or half an hour. The reason being, a lot of code is repetitive and boilerplate. You're connecting to a database. Well, that's standard database connection code. You're writing form validation on a particular model or app in a web app. Say you have a React app, you're generating a business model, and then you want to surface up that app in React. Well, a lot of that code is just the same thing over and over and over, and in the development loop, that just consumes a bunch of time where you're not really adding much value as a developer. You're just getting things done because that boilerplate needs to be there. So cutting that time, which is not really heavy thinking time, it's repetitive time. That's where the biggest number one boost. And as I mentioned with documentation, that as you finish up some code as a developer, understand what that code says, but getting it out there in a format, and in not just English too. This is the interesting thing, that generating documentation in multiple languages, which would have been extremely cost prohibitive, time prohibitive in the past. Now you can generate documentation in a multitude of languages, which can be very useful. Learning and exploring the code. That's it. So if you onboard a new developer to their team, whatever their level of experience, if they are an experienced developer, anyone new to the project, there's going to be a ramp-up time as they learn the code base. And if it's a sprawling code base with multiple connection points, as a new developer trying to understand the system, being able to chat with your code is quite a phenomenal thing. That if you take a code base and you say, okay, explain to me on the whole what this code base is doing. And then if you're in a particular module, you can say, tell me how this module works. What does this module depend on? What changes does this module take in the environment? All these kind of things where you have this conversation with the code in a very new and exciting way that was not possible before. You'd have to spend hours and hours and hours digging through the code, and depending on the level of code quality, following that path may have been tricky in the past or challenging at best. Learning new libraries, as you bring new tools on. If you're in the JavaScript space or anywhere in the front-end development space, you'll know front-end development changes very frequently. That whatever the hot library of today is, 6 to 8 months from now, it's likely there'll be a new tool, and whether to adopt that or ramping up or bringing in new libraries, all these kind of really time-consuming tasks, where being able to just ask questions of, hey, I just need to get this form wired up, or this button isn't working. Tell me what the fix is, and then reviewing what it suggests the fix. That can save a lot of time where you're hunting around for a particular setting or a particular flag on a button. It's pretty cool there. Improving focus and flow. So once you get into, you may have heard the term vibe coding. Vibe coding has kind of risen to the fore. Whether it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing is still to be seen. I think thoughtless coding is not a good idea, but vibe coding, where you're getting something done, you have a set of requirements, or generating those requirements if they're underdefined. This is another classic use case where you have underdefined requirements that you may get them from a business user and they're rather vague, where you can use GitHub Copilot to enhance those requirements, go back and forth with the business or whoever's requesting the feature, get the requirement done, and then stay in the flow once you have that and kind of work back and forth, generate tests, do the debugging, all with a combination of left-hand side of the screen is code and right-hand side of the screen is the chat, or either or, have half and half on your screen, whichever you prefer. But the idea is that you can just stay in the tool and really be maximally productive without having to hop around to look at documentation, hop around to look at how to do a particular function call, hop around to look up a library or find a new library. All of this can happen within the chat and your code base. You've got everything you need in one spot. And this is also not limited to just developers. If you're in DevOps and you're doing infrastructure automation, or you're doing any kind of deployment, with infrastructure as code, people, when you may hear that term infrastructure as code, the important thing there is code, because infrastructure is really a software development problem at this point. So managing infrastructure software and versioning your infrastructure to match with versioning your apps should happen at the same time, and GitHub Copilot is an excellent tool for doing that, and I'll show some demos later on around both app development and from a DevOps perspective. Code quality. So this one here, we're talking about making sure patterns are adhered to. Again, continuous revisions, and whether it be recommendation that the chat makes, or within, if you're using GitHub and GitHub Enterprise, when you make a pull request, having a code review, that GitHub Copilot would take on the code review and makes recommendations against either published documents in your organization, recommendations that your organization provides, or all these kind of things. So these are the primary use. There's many more benefits, but these are the big ones. It's develop faster, develop better code, and just be more focused and reduce stress. It makes for a much more enjoyable experience. And productivity all around. That's, I got around to this one. Okay, so let's talk about developer productivity. What does that mean? Talked about boilerplate code, and if you are a developer, so we have a mix in the audience of various roles. If you are a hands-on developer, you're likely familiar with boilerplate code and how unexciting it is to work with. It needs to be done. Databases need to be connected to. Login credentials need to be validated, all that kind of stuff, but it's really the same stuff over and over. Or if you're in the DevOps space, spinning up different cloud-based resources, adding on monitoring metrics, all these kind of things that are not really value added, but are base requirements in order for the code base to work. These are the kind of things that it really shines, that you can just say, hey, do this stuff for me, and thank you, get it done. Next is problem solving. You may be debugging, or you may be trying to figure something else, and it happens. We get stuck, and we're just looking at it, and it's like it's not clicking. So you can just bounce an idea. So you have a great programming buddy with you at all times that you can consult with and say, hey, how should I do this? I'm thinking of doing it this way. How should it be done? So there's this conversational element to GitHub Copilot, and then there's also the coding aspect as well. So it's really the two. It's not just coding. It's having conversations with the chatbot about your code and having conversations with it just in general around good development practices. Context switching, we talked about. So having to flip around into a bunch of tools. If you have everything you need, you may rarely need a browser. We're all there where we'd reach out to Stack Overflow potentially for answers or looking for guidance on various websites on how to approach a particular task. Stack Overflow has licensed its Q&A database to OpenAI and to Microsoft to pull those into the model. So the entire knowledge and history of Stack Overflow and all those kind of questions are all rolled into GitHub Copilot Chat. So now from within the IDE, you can just ask, hey, what's the answer to this? So that can really help productivity. Next is languages. So you may have an application that's written in Java, and maybe you're moving to Python. And so you need to make that translation into Python. Or you're new to Python, and you just need some help with the syntax. So whatever language it is that you're familiar with, maybe you're a JavaScript developer, and you're looking at some back-end code in C#, and you're like, how would I do function XYZ in JavaScript? I would say this. How do I say that in C#? And it would do that translation for you. So the big thing for me that I see with this multi-language approach is the real language that matters is your native spoken language, be it English, French, German, Hindi, whatever language you speak to the world. That's the ultimate programming language these days, because that's how you interact with Copilot. It'll take care of the syntax of the computer code. And I think, as we move, particularly with advances in MCPs, that's for another topic. But as we move further and further down the road, the particulars of programming languages become less important, and it's more clarity around what is the business requirement and what job needs to be done, and verifying that job is done versus the details of programming language. Debugging and testing. Now, this again, you may have an app that's been in production live for months or years even, and you get a bug report come in, and you have to go spelunking into the code base, trying to find that error wherever it is. GitHub Copilot, if you just describe the error, if you have a stack trace, or if you have a debug log, just post that in, and it'll come back saying, oh yeah, line 117 on this file over here is causing this condition, and is very, very handy for finding that. It's not the end all and be all. It's we still need human oversight over this, because it is a statistical model and may produce variance, but acceleration, cutting the time down is what it does very, very good. So here's an example of an experiment. This was run by GitHub, and they took a group of 95 professionals. Why 95? To have a large enough statistically valid base of developers. So you may have some really experienced developers in there. You may have some that are newer. But the question was, write an HTTP server, a simple HTTP server in JavaScript. So this would be a Node.js app that you put in a request and have it respond with a web page, right? Just super basic web server, a task any experienced developer should be able to do, fairly straightforward. And they said, okay, team A, they split into two groups. First team, use GitHub Copilot, try and get that JavaScript server up and running. And the second team, no Copilot, just use your own personal experience and write an HTTP server. So what they found was the non-Copilot group took about 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 40 minutes to get the job done. So still getting it done, but with a 70% completion rate. So 30% of the group was not able to get the task done. But the group with Copilot, almost an hour, over an hour and a half less time. So this is significant savings. And this is, writing an HTTP server is a lot more complex than what the average daily business application requires. It doesn't need a full network implementation and all the things entailed with writing a JavaScript app. So for less complex applications, the time savings could be significantly more. But this is actual test data. This is a published study. So if you wanted to look into the details of how the testing was done and the underlying details, the point being, the vast majority of people see a dramatic improvement in their dramatic reduction in their development time when using GitHub Copilot. So that's the exciting part here. And I know I can tell you myself personally that in all kinds of code, be it application, scripting, DevOps code, whatever it is that I'm doing myself personally, GitHub Copilot is a dramatic speed up. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the features of GitHub Copilot. Number one is code completion. So if you have not used GitHub Copilot, I will demo this. This piece there is almost magical. it's quite fascinating to see. You reach for the keyboard and it's already presented the answer. How does it know? Well, it's been trained on billions of examples, and it's highly likely that what you're about to type next makes sense within context. And that's the thing, is that when you load up your code base into GitHub Copilot, it scans the entirety of the code base, and the more code and the better quality code, it can infer things from the code base and understand how things operate together, and that's how it's able to provide these really good suggested completions. And I'll be demoing that in a bit. Multi-language. So we talked about moving back and forth between languages. I'll be demoing this as well. I have a legacy COBOL example that I'm going to translate into Java and Python. And you can go back and forth, go Python to COBOL if you needed to, because there is still a lot of COBOL out there. And I know in the Centrilogic client base, we deal a lot with financial services and insurance companies and people that have mainframes. Mainframes are still running the world, and there's a lot of COBOL out there. And on that note, we are actively using these tools and features to help companies migrate off of COBOL onto modern platforms. So if that's something you're interested in, please let us know in the chat. And it's pretty exciting and interesting stuff if you're moving legacy code and want to do it in a structured way. So inline suggestions. This is, as you're typing, it's like autocomplete, but it may say, hey, you want to move this code around or even refactor it, and then you just press tab to accept or not accept. You can press escape and ignore what it's suggesting. But you always feel the presence of your Copilot buddy there with you in the code. That it's helping you out, make things go. And comments and generating code. So as I mentioned with the requirements, it's an interesting shift in approaching how to write software. Is you could almost say requirements as code. Now, depending how long you've been in the industry, you may be familiar with compilable documentation, something Nuth was working on, that the idea being if you have very well written documentation, a software compiler should be able to interpret and compile that documentation. That never really caught on enough, because to capture the complexity in the documentation, you wind up turning it into programming code. But now with these tools, with modern tools and where we've gotten to, you can take English-based documents and generate code samples from them. So this is, again, a example of the advances we've had. We got a question in the chat. Does it support Cold Fusion? I don't know off the top of my head. Let's try that in the demo. I'll make a note here to myself. We'll try a Cold Fusion sample. We are seeing examples with legacy databases, translating legacy database script into new script. Cold Fusion was an app, web app platform, I believe, from back in the day. So yeah, we'll take a look. And IDEs, again, so the Copilot, GitHub Copilot is a Microsoft product. While it's a GitHub product, GitHub is fully owned by Microsoft. So there's the concern that it only works with Microsoft tools, and that is absolutely not the case. It works with all the leading IDEs and can be used independently, can be used from the command line. So there is no tie to any particular IDE, which is integrated development environment for those not familiar. Okay, so prompt engineering. As you may have used ChatGPT, and you can see, you may or may not be familiar with the varying level of quality in the output that you get from interacting with chat really depends on how you prompt it. And the prompt is the question that you ask, the way you ask the question, what you ask in the question, what you say in the question really makes a difference. So the better prompting you have, the better quality output you're going to have. So the idea here is, if you have comments in your code, the more legible your code base just like to a human developer, that they would look at the code base and understand what's going on. To Copilot, it is a language model. At the end of the day, it is a language model. So the clearer and the intent in the language, the better the output's going to be. So writing clear instructions work best. If you're generating code and you want something in a particular way, let's say you want to validate a social insurance number. You say, okay, give me a function, and I'm going to pass in the number, and then just give it the description of the function, and then it'll understand what you need. And then based on the return value, if you provide the return value in the function, then it'll know, oh, okay, you're looking for a yes, no. You're looking for a Boolean. You're looking for a yes, no. I'll return with that versus returning, if there's an error, returning the check. So the more you help it along, prompt it, the better the result will be there. And lastly and this comes from experimentation, but understanding the scope and size of tasks that it can be. If you say, write me a complete application from scratch, it won't do particularly well in that, because the task is too complex, and language models and in their current generation have context windows or limited short-term memory is a good way to think of it. That short-term memory is getting ever larger. But that's in the term of context. Context is in tokens. So the limited tokens it can have. There is work underway in the frontier research labs for language models, for context-free language models. So if and when context-free language models come to pass, that is essentially language models with unlimited memory. We don't have those yet. If they do, then you may be able to say, write a complete application from scratch and do the whole thing, but we're not there yet. So in today's day and age, we have to spoon feed the tasks that we want done to get the best results. Using meaningful variable names. Okay, this is just good advice to any developer, right? The more legible your code by a human, the more legible it's going to be to the model. So I do have an example where I've shown obfuscated C code. If you know the obfuscated C contest, where it's intentionally make the code as cryptic as possible. I do have an example of that to show how it's able to parse. But on the whole, in a business environment where productivity is your aim and you want to get things done, the better named your functions, something like add customer record as a function name versus H5 or something similar would be more useful. And then lastly, iterating and refining. So as you're going, so when you ask a prompt, you'll get a response. But really what you want to do is continuously be working back and forth. So you say, okay, generate this code. And then if it's not quite the output, you say, okay, change the way this function body works, or change the way this loop is structured. You may have a preference for using for loops versus for each loops and these kind of things. The idea is that it's this continuous conversation going back and forth with that kind of thing. Okay, so now getting close to the demos here, let's talk about use cases. What are the best use cases for Copilot amongst many? Refactoring code. So you're just working with existing code. You want to clean it up. In the C# world or .NET, you may have been using tools there to do that kind of thing. GitHub Copilot can do ReSharper. If you're familiar with ReSharper, GitHub, you can just talk and ask to do ReSharper type activities. If you're moving between languages, moving between libraries, even moving between versions of frameworks. If you have breaking changes, version 6 of your framework has features, and then version 7 introduces a whole bunch of breaking changes, and you need to you need to do those changes. GitHub Copilot, when you say, okay, I have version 6 of this framework, and I'm moving to version 7, can you find the instances of the breaking changes? And it'll list those out, and is quite helpful for finding solutions, because you'll be in your editor, you'll see where the error is, and you say, oh, okay, I need to change. How do I do this in the new framework? And if you haven't been working for the new framework for very long, because it's brand new, you may not know off the top of your head, and it'll provide a big time saver doing that. Again, writing tests, we'll do some demos of this. Very useful in writing tests. Legacy code, I will do a demo on that. Okay, and at this point we got to the demo, so I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. And questions-wise, we just have the one about cold fusion, yeah? And Dave, thanks for putting that answer in there. I will do a sample on that. Okay, let me reshare my screen. So just to make my screen easier to read, I am using a 4K monitor, and at times the font can be hard to use. So here I'm using a recent version of Visual Studio Code. You may have heard of other vibe coding editors that are based on Visual Studio Code. So there's Cursor and there's Windsurf. There are many that have very deep integrations with code editing involved, but the ideas I'm showing here apply to those tools as well. So when you're in your environment and you install GitHub Copilot, you'll get this new button here. You'll get the GitHub Copilot chat. So when you open this up, and again, I made my font pretty big so that you can see what's going on. But you know, in my mind, this is the development of the future, is the half and half screen. And so if you're brand new and you want to see what you can do, you can type help. And help, so these slash, they call these the slash commands. So when you do a /, you'll get these commands that will help you do things. So for example, if you did help new, right? So and then so at workspace means deal with all the files in my application, versus if you have a particular file open, you may say, because if you say find the error, if you just said find the error, if you have a page open or a particular file open, it'll look for an error in that file. Whereas if you said at workspace find errors, it would look at all the files in your environment. So that's the at workspace. And then you have explain. So if you're brand new to a code base, you can open the code base and do /explain. Here's a just mass generated test, do tests right away. Here you have a bug and a bunch more examples. So a lot of documentation. But here I'm just going to jump into my demos here. So I'm going to start with a SQL query. So I'm going to do some Java examples. I'm going to do some, actually, yeah, you know what? I'll start with that demo right now. So there's two modes, to chat here, okay? And I'm going to say, create a CRUD application in C#. Okay, so I'm just saying, generate me a brand new app. And so this may not be the typical use case, but because I'm starting this demo, I do have a sample app ready to go, but I'm just going to generate a brand new app that we can work with. And CRUD, for those unfamiliar, it's create, read, update, delete. So this is a very basic application that just can take user input, save it to a database, and then bring it back in a query. So it's implementing the MVC pattern, the model view controller pattern. So it's going to create a home controller. It's going to create an item that we're going to edit, and it is going to do some services here. In your ask, not sure in the context there, Robert, but yeah, I'm not showing GitHub agent mode here in this particular example, if that's what that question was. But I'm going to do, there, 1 second. Okay, so this is my sample here, my sample window. Okay, so I'm creating a workspace. And so this is creating a new VS Code workspace, and it's going to drop this app into a brand new folder that did not exist before. And it's creating all these files. And while we're waiting there, and again, I chose C# here, but it could be any language. If you wanted a React app, I'm going to open this in a new window. Okay, so here, let's take a look at our brand new app. So this did not exist moments ago. Let me just increase my fonts here. Okay, so we got a home controller, and we look in here. Here's our main controller file. Now let's say you're brand new to this code base. And here we have our application builder, and you've never worked with this code before. I'm going to say at workspace, explain what this app is. Now, so this app is a simple CRUD app using ASP.NET MVC. It's using collections, using all of these IDEs. It can create, read, update, and delete. How it works, it uses the main MVC pattern, goes into startup, and here on the startup, I can click in, and I can see what it's referring to. And so this is an example of code generation. Okay, and then maybe I'll say, write a user guide in Markdown format for this application. Now, obviously, this documentation is not going to be super useful because it's a very basic app that doesn't really do anything. But here's an example of it generating table of contents. Run the application. How to use it. So taking this app, this content, and writing it out, super useful stuff. And then say, write a debugging guide. And this can be also very useful if you have a legacy app and you just want to get documentation out there into an app of where things go wrong. And then if you check this into GitHub, the human can enhance it with things that are known to go wrong, connect it in with whatever's going on there. Set your environment variable. So it's helping with the debugging process here. So you can spend a whole time working with that. But I'm going to hop back over just to show some more of my other demos. So now I'm back over into I'll start a new chat here, back over into my main workspace. And I'm going to, here in this, let's see, is it this one? Yeah, it's this program. So I have this program file. So what I'm going to demo here is chat completion. Okay, so you can see here I have an app. This is a similar version of a CRUD app, and I have six options here on the command line. So option 1, option 2, option 3. So I'm going to add a new feature. People like reporting. So I'm going to say, so now if you notice as I'm typing, right, I'm in here, and it knew if I press tab, it writes that code for me, right? But I don't want it to say that. I want it to say 7, generate reports. Learn to type. Okay, so now I have this in my editor. If I go down here in my code, I'm going to make this a little smaller. Okay, so here I am at case 6. I'm going to add the new case statement. So I'm going to press the letter C. And notice I just pressed C, and it filled in. I press tab, and there it is. There's my code. That's code completion. So that will happen all over the place. And it's quite impressive that it knew how to do that. And now I'll say, write C# code to produce a PDF report of the output. So here it's suggesting, so I didn't tell it what library to use. I didn't tell it how to do that. I just said, I need PDF output. And here it's saying use PDF Sharp or use iText 7, and then it's giving me the code. And now I did not create a new file for this, so I'll create, I'll call it PDF report. And if you're familiar with GitHub Copilot, there's a bunch of ways to do this. So I'm showing various methods. One is to do it with edit and have it edit directly. I am just going to have it insert the code here. And there we go. So there is my new PDF writer report. Let's take a look at what it generated for us here. So it called it report PDF. That kind of makes sense. It's making a product report, and then it's looping through all the products and writing out the file. So productivity-wise, one, I would have had to go find a library, look that up, and then I would have had to figure out the methods and generate all this code. But now that's all done. So now, being good developers, let's say write unit tests for this code. And here we go. So it's chosen the XUnit library. So if you were using a different testing framework, you could certainly certainly get it to generate all kind of tests. But here it's doing arrange, the standard setting up a fact, doing arrange assert impact. So I'm and act. So now it's going to generate the report. Now this is where some oversight should generate PDF. I guess is that a test? It is a test that it runs the report, make sure that it's there. You'd probably want to add a bit more business logic. The content, so here it's saying it only checks that the file exists. So this is where the human oversight, the framework of the test, then here, and then, so if I do control dot, say, and do that input there, but I'll leave that for now. Okay, so that is unit testing. And then lastly, we can do write documentation for it as well, but I showed that before. What I am going to do is do a COBOL example. So if you've never seen COBOL code, you've heard of COBOL, but never actually seen it, just give me a sec while I clear out this stuff. This is what the world still runs on. There's millions and millions of COBOL files. So this is how classes are defined. You look at the syntax, it's very wordy. So first of all, if you've inherited a COBOL migration project, you can say, explain this COBOL to me. And it's going to read the code. So it's a merge sort sample. That is the name. It demonstrates how to do a merge sort into 2 sample files. So it tells you all this. And then it's going on and on about the different divisions. Okay, so I'm going to say rewrite this COBOL as Java. And let me stop what it was working on there. So I'm taking, now, if you're approaching a COBOL project, you wouldn't really go at it file by file like this. You'd take all the code, all the COBOL code into a repository, then you extract things out because you'd want to, oh, I got a little Java issue here. So here, merge sort sample, so it's creating test data. And then, so if I look at these last things here, yeah, so you see this comment 5. It's doing this in here. So this is an example of the merge there. Okay, so now if I take that file, let me just do a new file. Whoops. Kind of type right here. Okay, so I'm going to insert this at cursor. And I'll stop in just a sec to go over the questions. So now I have this Java file, right? So now I want to containerize this and deploy it. so we're doing our app work. We've done some app dev. We created that .NET file. Say write a Docker file to deploy this code. So you may not be familiar, in the DevOps world, the intention of DevOps was development and operations working together, but it kind of turned into development operations of the act of developing. But the initial intent was for, let me make a new workspace here. For the operators of an environment to run containerized applications and the development team be responsible for developing an app and containerizing it. So then, so if you look at that, here I have the Java app. Oh, that was the empty Java app there. But this container file, my Java is not working here. I can say, now I want to deploy this to Kubernetes. Let me make this bigger here. Other way. Write a Kubernetes deployment file. Oops. Okay. Write a GitHub action to deploy to Kubernetes. Or I'll say AKS. There we go. Okay, so you got to get the syntax right. So this will be a YAML file, and I'm going to just copy this and paste it in here. So now, with this, what was previously COBOL application, translate it to Java, and then take that Java, build a Docker file that's using the OpenJDK. It's compiling the app, it's running Java C and copying it in. And now I have a deployment file that I can push to GitHub. And if I were to check all this in to GitHub, that would trigger. And then the last thing I would do is connect it up to my Azure environment. So here it's asking for a secret of my Azure credentials. Notice it's not staring secrets in code. And then it's building and pushing the Docker image. And it is setting up the pods in AKS. And it's doing the AKS deployment. So there you go, from COBOL to app running in the cloud in, a very quick demo. Obviously, I've glossed over a lot of details here, but in the general sense, this is the workflow. And to do this using traditional methods is days, weeks, months of work. There was a question about Cold Fusion, so let's just do that. This is a completely off-the-cuff demo, so this is unprepared. Let's see how it can do. Let's see if it can generate some stuff, and then we'll see if we can work with the stuff that it generates. Okay, so paste this in. Okay, and I'll say connect to a database, get product information. Typical use case for something like that. Now here, this C output. I'm not familiar with Cold Fusion. It's been a long time. But so I'd have to obviously dig a little more into it. And assuming you have legacy Cold Fusion and you want to kind of bring it forward, I assume you're not trying to implement new apps. Maybe you are implementing new apps, but it looks like, so we have these inline queries, and I'll say, okay, so now I'll start a new chat, and when you start a new chat, it drops the context of the old one, right? So you're dealing with a new instance. So I'll save this, and I'll call it page 1. I don't know what Cold Fusion app file format is. It may have a particular extension, but now let's say rewrite this as a React app. Let's bring it up to today. And so here's what it's recommending. So it's taking this very basic get product app, and it's creating a product table JSX. So JSX is React's syntax that goes into the browser. So let's make a new thing here, and we'll just call it let's call it Cold Fusion React. Make a bunch of spelling mistakes. That's okay. Just got 2 minutes left here, so we'll see if we can do this. In the meantime, question: can you talk about context, file, project, or solution? Right. Okay. So the context, let's open this up. The context is the main one is the workspace. So the workspace would be whatever you're open. So if you use Visual Studio Code when you say open workspace, or if you're familiar with Visual Studio, it'd be a solution file. So that's the main context that it works with. So it has your code. Now the codex library, like the brain of GitHub Copilot, is sitting on the GitHub servers. And when you make requests, it takes snippets of your code, posts those along to GitHub. GitHub has all the Microsoft, it does not retain that. It just answers it and then discards the snippets, but then gives you back the results. So you kind of have that loop going back and forth. If your code is already stored in GitHub, then you can optionally enable indexing and pre-index the code so it doesn't have to do that, do the back and forth that is kind of already there. So let's take a look at this app here in React. And as far as controlling the context, you can do it per file. So when you don't do as workspace, it's whatever open file you have. And let's just take a look at this component. So we've got this production table. So it is actually quite a bit more wordy than the original Cold Fusion. But here we're loading up a page. And this is a Cold Fusion to React in a couple seconds. Obviously, we'd need a lot of validation, and we generate tests, and we generate documentation, everything we've been talking about. Just a minute left. If there's any questions, please let us know. And if you would like to talk further about this, please reach out to myself. It's scastle@centrilogic.com. Just hit me up, or I'm on LinkedIn. And we're happy to talk about any projects you may have. With that, thank you for your time.